Thank you, Fiona. Good evening, councillors, officers and members of the public. Before we commence the meeting, just draw your attention to the fire regulations which are displayed on the screen behind me. Also, can I ask that everyone ensures their mobile phones are switched to silent or off? Members of the public, both of you. I'd like to say the committee, we understand matters under consideration tonight may be emotive. However, please be respectful of those around you in the public gallery and refrain from demonstrating your feelings. Moving on to the main business, can I introduce, for the benefit of the webcast, the officers in front of me. Lewis Jones from the legal team, followed by Steve Weaver, our interim development control manager, Chris French, the principal planning officer, Matthew Ellis, our principal planning officer, Elizabeth Sims, head of planning, and Catherine Pearson, the area team leader. Item 1 on the agenda, minutes of the last meeting held on the 9th of April have been on the table for the last 30 minutes. Is it your wish I sign them as a true record of that meeting? Thank you. I'll do that at the end of the meeting. Fiona, apologies for absence and declarations.
Thank you, Chairman. I've had apologies for absence from councillors Brian Adams, Maurice Byam, John Ward, Dennis Lee, David Else and Liz Townsend. Thank you.
And item 3, declarations of interest, Fiona. Have we received any?
Councillor Forajewski would like to make a declaration.
Carry on, Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. As you know, I was going to have to leave this meeting early this evening because I have my first civic event in Farnham later on this evening, of which I'm really looking forward to. I have to declare an interest, a non-pecuniary interest, in item number 7. I regret deeply having to declare an interest in this particular item, but I do understand, as a matter of public perception in terms of the code, and if I may quote, to declare any non-pecuniary interest that you consider to have sufficient weight as to undermine your ability to make an open-minded and objective decision, as this application in its history came before the parish council some time ago, and I'm a member of the parish council, Cranley Parish Council, and at the time of this application I was the chairman of the planning. I was chairman of the parish council, but I wasn't a member of the planning application. So whilst it is with deep regret I cannot take part in this debate, of which I would really welcomed. Unfortunately, I understand I can't because of public perception in my role as chairman of Cranley Parish Council at the time. So when this item comes before committee, I shall leave the chamber. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other declarations? Nope. Item 4, questions from members of the public. Have we had any, Fiona?
None, Chairman.
Item 5, performance against government targets. Steve Weaver.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. Yes, so agenda item 5 is the table that you've now seen on a number of occasions. It's really there for noting. As usual, split into 2 parts, performance in relation to speed, and you'll see there excellent performance figures being maintained by the service across the piece and well in excess of government targets. Turning to the performance on quality, again, as usual, the non-majors position is comfortably below the target for designation. And in relation to the majors, you'll see that we've got 1 major appeal decision yet to come through in relation to the last assessment period. That's likely to take some time now. There's an inquiry to be reopened. But in terms of where we're currently at in our sort of track record at the moment, the bottom row, which looks at the best estimate rolling period since the 1st of April, there you can see there's an improving position, and again it's comfortably below the threshold target. So any questions, happy to take, Chairman, but essentially it's a report for noting this evening.
A report for noting, is that noted? Councillor Munner.
A quick question, if I may. The assessment period ended on the 31st of March 17. So why is an appeal that's still outstanding relevant to that performance period?
Through you, Chairman. So the assessment period was in relation to decisions that were taken during that period, and then it allowed a roll-on period for the appeal process associated with any refusals in respect of major applications. What we haven't had confirmed to us, because we're a long time after the 31st of March now, as you rightly point out, what we haven't had confirmed to us is whether it's actually been guillotined at any point. What we do know, we haven't been notified that we're a designated authority, but we are still keeping that there as an item under review, because, as I say, we do have one major decision that was taken in the assessment period that's yet to be finally decided at appeal.
And sorry, the follow-up is that we've now finished the second assessment period, if that's what 1st of April 2017 to 30th of April 2018. Are we now not into a new one?
Again, through you, Chairman, the government haven't actually announced the next assessment period. So what we're giving you when it says best estimate is simply because that's our current sort of trajectory, if you like. We don't know what the next assessment period is going to be. It hasn't been confirmed, but we thought it best to see how the picture is unfolding since the 31st of March 2017 to give members and ourselves obviously a good idea of how we're performing in relation to appeal decisions. And as you can see, it's a healthier position since 2017 than the 2 years prior.
Thank you. And one last question, if I may. And are there any decisions, major decisions, which are still within the appeal period, so that number could be affected by any appeal request made by a disappointed applicant?
There may well be. I don't have the full breakdown, and obviously there may be decisions that are just been taken which actually haven't been appealed yet. So we'll have to keep that under review as the period. Sorry. Yeah. As we report each month, that you'll see that the percentage figure unfold in relation to both the number of major decisions that have been made and the outcomes of them.
And am I correct in saying that the period when the government announced it is a 2-year period?
That's what we're expecting.
Thank you. Right, moving on then to agenda item number 6, and Matthew Ellis to introduce Article 4 directions.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. This report responds to concerns that town and parish councils have regarding the impact of the loss of commercial premises to housing is having on the well-being on some of the town, local and neighbourhood centres. This is obviously made worse by the permitted development rights that allow offices, storage facilities and shops to change to housing without the need for a planning application. Although they need to get prior approval, only a limited number of planning matters, need to be considered before the conversion can actually take place. So the town and parish councils consider that Article 4 directions should be made in response to these concerns. Article 4 directions, you may know, are statutory directions that withdraw permitted development rights so that a planning application is required to carry out the change of use. So normally the head of planning services has a delegated authority to actually make Article 4 directions. However, given the very high profile nature of the impact of the loss of commercial premises in particular areas to housing, it's considered that yourselves as the JPC should consider the request from the town and parishes. Now, the first annex shows that the monitoring of prior approvals shows some 34,000 square metres of business space, mainly offices, has been lost as a result of permitted development rights since they were changed back in 2013. So this obviously has an impact in terms of the overall loss of office floor space in the borough, and that loss really needs to be considered in the context that the employment land review, when we undertook it for the local plan, showed that actually there's a very small requirement for an amount of additional office floor space. However, it's not just a qualitative impact, but also, a quantitative impact, but it's obviously a qualitative impact as well. Just as important is the actual loss of commercial premises on the vitality and the viability of that centre that it lies within. In the case of the shops, again, the monitoring shows actually it's been relatively small, the amount of the loss of floor space, but actually the loss of one shop could have an impact to the area it lies with and obviously the services it provides the community. Obviously the premises, when it's lost, also can have a domino effect as the commercial area becomes less and less attractive. So obviously town and parish councils consider that Article 4 directions will allow the council to consider the impact of the loss of commercial premises and therefore the well-being of the area and other planning matters through a planning application. And these directions can be made either for individual properties for a much wider geographical area. They can also be made immediately where permitted development rights are withdrawn straight away. However, the direction would need to be confirmed within 6 months of the making of the direction. Or you can have a non-immediate direction where permitted development rights are withdrawn 12 months after the direction has been served. So undoubtedly, Article 4 directions have benefits as they hand back control to the council and allow us to determine planning applications. However, they're not panacea in themselves. In considering the town and parish council's request, there are a number of other matters that also need to be considered. Firstly, there's the legal implications as set out in the report. It clearly indicates there needs to be clear justification for the direction. Although we have an adopted local plan that seeks to protect commercial premises, it does not at the moment specify the areas where premises should be protected. As you know, the government is seeking to boost the delivery of homes and that the priority is on brownfield land. National policy is that it's not reasonable to consider that commercial premises can continue, then a change of use to housing is appropriate. So we'll need to gather robust evidence that the well-being of an area is being harmed to support the direction. It has to be noted that although councils decided if an Article 4 direction is appropriate, we will have to notify the Secretary of State, who can then intervene if they do not think it is justified. We also have to consider what an Article 4 direction will actually give us that a prior approval system doesn't already. The prior approvals allow for some planning matters to be considered already, as you know. From the council's point of view, of course, the change to the permitted development rights in 2013 weakened the control of the council over these changes of uses. However, we also really need to consider the government's view. They want to make it obviously easier to deliver more housing, and therefore permitted development rights achieve this. But they introduce prior approval system to allow the council to have some control that other permitted development rights do not have. So the National Planning Practice Guidance says there should be particularly strong justification for the withdrawal of permitted development rights relating to cases where prior approval powers are available to control permitted development. Second point I was going to make is it's important to remember that although an Article 4 direction only means that a planning application is required to allow a change of use to housing, the direction does not mean that an application has to be refused. As I said, the national policy context is in favour of housing to deliver housing, and that will need to be considered when determining an application. As such, a planning application could still be approved. Thirdly, in addition to the resources actually needed to make directions, if a direction is made, then the council may be liable for compensation. This means that we may have to pay compensation if the council refuses an application which is subject to a direction, or grants planning permission which has more limiting conditions than the legislation allows. We can be liable for any expenditure or other loss resulting from that direction being made. It can also mean that if an immediate direction is made, or a direction is made within 12 months of a direction being served as a non-immediate one, then we could be liable to pay any compensation. So I think the report sets out some of the benefits and the risks of making Article 4 direction. In light of those risks and benefits, I've set out 4 options to consider. The first was preparing a direction for all premises and areas suggested by town and parish councils to have Article 4 directions. The second is about selecting specific areas or premises where we select them to undertake a direction where we consider it's appropriate after gathering more evidence. The third is the council just selecting one area as a pilot so we can measure its success, see how successful it is in protecting the commercial well-being of the area. And obviously the fourth is to do nothing. And given the benefits and the risks that we've just discussed, officers recommend the third option to start making a non-immediate direction for Beacon Hill following the gathering of further evidence on the specific area that it should apply to. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Before we move to the recommendation, as the local member, I'd just say a few words. We've seen 19 conversions of offices, accountants' offices, solicitors, shops, etc., more than half of which have no off-road parking whatsoever. Some of them have no amenity space at all. We know that retail is changing, that's obvious, but what we have seen is some rather unattractive conversions. The street scene certainly has altered, not for the better, and it certainly doesn't conform with the Haslemere design statement. So I was on side with the Haslemere Town Council in moving this forward, and I would strongly recommend that it gives us some control over what is developed. We can choose the designs. At the moment, there is no choice whatsoever. There are three reasons, highways being one of them, flooding being another, and I've forgotten the third at the moment. But my recommendation is that we follow the officer's advice here. So, Councillor Coburn.
No, I thoroughly agree, and I think all of us are aware of the danger across the borough of really loss of character as well as the loss of the economic viability, and I think this is the way to do it. My only slight worry in this one is the damage is so great, it's going to be much harder, I would have thought, to assess the impact than if you were starting with a pristine area and then being able to see. But having said that, you know, I think to have control over this, certainly in the neighbourhood planning fund, and we put in that we would like to see active uses, you know, maintained along certain streets, and of course it's becoming very, very hard to do that under the current situation. So if we do this trial along Beacon Hill, which has been badly affected, and we do get some evidence that it does work, then I think it would be an excellent tool that we could perhaps use sparingly, I'm not saying across the borough, but to retain control of this and try and protect especially the character, but the economic viability as well. So I think this is a good recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Dinas.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just thank Matthew for an excellent report and actually a really good explanation of putting it into context, which I thought was really, really useful. So thank you, Matthew. Really, what I was going to say is now already been echoed by two of my colleagues. I support this. I think the option being put forward is correct. And you know, we're seeing what other people have done. You know, you've got Epsom and Ewell, you've got Mole Valley, you've got Winchester. You know, so there is evidence on the best ways of doing this. Hopefully, we've taken all the best practice from that, and I'm sure we have, and Elizabeth is confirming that. So I do think this is the right thing to do. I think it's the right thing to go to one particular area so we can learn and get our own experience. And I'm hopeful that in due course, other areas may well come up as well, but it gets my support, Chair.
Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. I'd also like to say I also support this as a member representing a ward that contains one of our 4 town centres. I think it's an interesting thing to consider, and I'd be interested to see what this pilot brings up. I would just note that if any of these planning permissions applications come to the Chamber, I'm guessing actually, as you said, most of them will actually probably have a good chance of passing anyway because of the current policy framework. So it will be interesting to see how many actually get denied once we've reviewed them.
Councillor Mulliner.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to ask Matthew why, if we're looking to do a pilot, we're going for a non-immediate Article 4 direction, because that seems, if I understand the report correctly, that nothing happens for 12 months. So if nothing happens for 12 months, what are we doing in that 12 months in terms of conducting a pilot?
Well, the main reason that's put forward as a non-immediate one is on the grounds that actually it's the compensation one would have to pay if we were to make an immediate direction, because that would then affect the properties that were concerned. So that's the rationale for the non-immediate approach, and that's, I think, other authorities have taken. The situation is, with directions, is it has to go through the process which is set out in the legislation, and the important thing is about the consultation with the landowners or the property owners that are going to be affected by that. So it is about making sure that we've got the right balance, because we are obviously going to affect properties that are by the Article 4 direction.
If you made an immediate one, I'd like to know how the compensation would be calculated. I mean, what loss would have to be proved, and it would be good to know how that would be done. But secondly, if you're going to consult with the landowners and those affected, one might be able to guess they wouldn't be very enthusiastic. How is the position different then if you then, having consulted and been told they aren't happy, you still go ahead? Apart from moving it down the line by several months, what has changed?
The need for an immediate one, as I say, will allow for those permitted development rights to be withdrawn straight away. So it affects those properties. So the difference is about fairness. It's about creating that balance to make sure that everyone's been able to have their say. Now, it may be that there will be good reasons from the landowners why there shouldn't be an Article 4 direction, and it will give us the chance to justify it, because, as I said, the government can clearly intervene if there is no justification for it. So it's about making that balance and being fair.
Fine, but then when we get to it, if we just take things forward where it's predictable that the landowners will not be happy, and their reasons for objecting are simply that it's going to deprive them of the chance to convert a building into residential and make a certain amount of profit, which is a perfectly understandable motive, but one that we might feel was not helpful to the area. How then are things different at that point? If we want to go ahead with the Article 4, we know they aren't happy, but we think there's a good reason for it. Presumably, all we've done is we've shown that we've followed a process to give them a chance to have their say, but the effective position is the same as if we'd done it immediately.
Yes, I mean, effectively, you come to the same outcome, but you're going to have to obviously move very quickly because you have to confirm it within 6 months. But again, the important point is about the liability for that compensation. As I say, there is quite clear process for the compensation which will be paid, but from the advice that I've been given from other authorities, they would not recommend going for a non-immediate one because of the compensation. And I don't know how much that will be, but I'm imagining that obviously because it's impacting on the way you can use your property, that will be quite significant.
I think you meant immediate there, not non-immediate. Yeah. And lastly, in the context of a non-immediate, how would the pilot or trial be carried out? I'm rather unclear about what we will be trying to test in this pilot or trial to help us to come to our own conclusions.
Well, as I said, if we make the direction on them, we need to gather the evidence about the impact. My report clearly states that there needs to be some more evidence gathering about the actual impact it has on the area. If we then successfully serve one, and it's used, then we can then monitor the planning applications coming in and how they have actually impacted the area and its viability and the well-being of that area, to see if it is something that's been effective in actually meeting the objectives of protecting the commercial well-being of that area.
So just to be clear, you go through the consultation period, which lasts several months. At the end of that, if we come to the conclusion that we think it will still be a good idea, we then apply or impose the Article 4 direction and remove permitted development rights. We then expect a number of applications to come forward, which now have to go through full planning application process. And if we turn some of them down, say on design grounds or parking or something, which we can't do at the moment, what are we testing the impact of that decision against to know whether or not we're being successful?
Basically, we're testing to see if an application which is then submitted and we turn it down, then it's the well-being of that area that is being protected, as well as other planning matters that are being looked at that we wouldn't have been able to do before. So if we find that that's something which is meeting the objectives of that particular area, then we can say, actually, this is something we may wish to roll out to other areas which are affected.
I'm going to stop, I think, because I could just think this is a very difficult area. You're sort of testing unknowns, and I'm not quite sure how you do that. I mean, you can't look at one line of history where you did allow permission development rights and they do convert a shop into a house, and then imagine what life would have been like that compared to where you've said, no, you can't do it because we've found planning reasons against it. So it's that part which I'm afraid I am left completely unclear about, but I'm perfectly in favour of going down this route, but I do think there are some complications attached.
I think that's one of the reasons why we're actually advocating a pilot, because there are a lot of uncertainties about it. The effectiveness of Article 4, we just do not know. Now, the other authorities that do have them are different from us in terms of the well-being of their areas, the type of areas that they're affecting. So, to a certain extent, if you spoke to them, they'd say, oh, yes, they've all been very, very successful. But we can't make a direct comparison with them. So the important point, I think, for us, given the benefits and the risks, is to give it a trial, go through the process of making them, see how it affects other the premises, see how it affects the well-being of the areas, and then come back and consider that in due course.
Elizabeth.
Chairman, just to add to that, I think one example of success will be, at the moment, in areas where identifying adverse impacts on communities as a result of not being able to control effects of development because they fall under prior approval. So, for example, as Councillor Ishwood suggested, parking, which may result from changes from B1A to C3, where we can't normally control that under a prior approval. If the result of requiring express planning permission for this, we come to a conclusion on the same proposal, I'm making this up, but this would be an example, we want to refuse it on that ground, and then it is subsequently upheld on appeal, our decision, then that has to be a measure of success of us achieving a benefit for the community as a result of having imposed the Article 4. But until we've run the course of putting the Article 4 in place, then triggering the need for planning permission, making a decision which then, in our view as a council, better supports communities, the planning of communities, and winning them, we won't know whether it's successful or not. That, to me, will be one of the tests of the success of the Article 4. It's quite subtle, but it's quite important.
Sounds as though the test is not actually about whether there's a positive impact on the well-being of the community, but whether or not we win appeals, which makes sense, but if that's what we're saying, it's good to know.
Right, three more. Councillor Band.
Thank you. Well, I support what's being proposed here, and I think it is a good report, and I understand the reasons why we want to go for a trial like this. My only concern is that to make sure that as we develop this work, we actually liaise with the towns and the parishes to brief them as to what we're doing and what we're learning, because I can see, while this is we're focusing on Beacon Hill to start with, there will be pressures developing quickly which might not be able to be directly foreseen at this point in time, which may want those towns to themselves move forward in the light of their development of their own local plans to start to gather evidence, but using the format at which we're developing. And I can see in Cranley, for example, the Littlemead industrial estate is going to be surrounded by other housing development. So inevitably there's going to be pressures on the owners there to think about converting it to residential accommodation. And I can see that situation may repeat itself in other towns and parishes. So I think it's vital that we actually, an ongoing process, liaise with the towns and parishes as to what we're doing and what lessons we're learning, and in bringing them along with us. So if they want to start gathering evidence, then they have the ability to start preempting some of the work that needs to be done if they want to take it further in their area. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I read this slightly differently. When I first went through it, I was very pleased because I got to a bit which said where are the the case for making Article 4 directions at the bottom of page 9. I thought, oh, well, that's excellent. Okay, there's the pros. And then I looked for the case against making Article 6.4 directions, and I couldn't find it. But I'm very pleased that Ian has put it, but he put the title as factors to relevant to considering making Article 4 directions, and we got 4 points in there. And they make sense, and actually I've come to the point where I was convinced we didn't ought to do this. I've learned a little bit more since I've been here, but I thought if it's ineffective, if it's going to take time, money, it's probably not going to work for us anyway. And if we've got other things which can do the job better, I think we're heading in the wrong direction. We should be trying to, if we're doing a pilot, we should get better information out of Cranley Parish Council if that's what we need, or put together the information that we haven't got at the moment to justify doing this for Littlemead, because that's where I thought the problem is more likely to be. Looking at Beacon Hill, I don't know if you mind turning to page 27, Chairman. I know we've got another item on the agenda, we don't want to be here all night, but I think we've been asked for a steer, and I don't think we, if we're going to consider it, let's do it properly. You've got a map there. You know this better than I do. Obviously, I know the area, but I've never leafleted that area. That's how you get to know one, I suppose. I see within the area we've got Beacon Hill Community Primary School. I mean, in the bottom right, the southeast lump of it. We've got Longmead House and the Manse. I don't know what they are. And the United Reformed Church, well, would that be a problem if it was converted to housing? The garage, well, yep, that, and obviously the shops and Regent House, that would be. There's a surgery over the far side, but I can't see that most of that actually. Why are we protecting things that probably don't need protecting? The frontage I can understand. The other side of the road. Has this been looked at in great detail, and to what extent are these already housing anyway? I don't understand, exactly why we're looking at this area, because quite frankly, this is very close to Hankley Common and Devil's Jumps and the Devil's Punch Bowl, and it's housing. If they're converting it to housing, then that surely Habitats overrides any of these permitted development rights. I'm quite sure they always have. They can't do it. They can't produce an appropriate assessment. Page 100 of our paper's in front of us. I know it's been withdrawn, but the document's still there. If you read on page 100 and 101 of what was coming forward for Way Hill, which isn't that far away, obviously.
I think we're straying off the subject.
Well, no, not at all.
We are not talking about the Habitat Directive. We are talking purely about Article 4 directions.
Absolutely. What we're talking about is whether it's worth doing it, and everything that I've heard about here, and I've heard other people say the same thing, is that the concern here is whether or not this is actually effective, whether there's any point in doing it. And what I'm saying is that when we've got something which exists that is in place, which stops it from being turned to, provided we work with the law and abide by the law, they're not going to be turned into. We've got the choice. I mean, we have got the choice through Habitats as to if they came in with an Article 6.4 exemption test because they couldn't conduct a complete appropriate assessment, and they came through Article 6.4 saying there's imperative reasons of overriding public interest that this is changed to housing. We can turn around and say, no, there's not enough car parking. We can do far more with that than we possibly could with wasting our time and spending money doing an Article 6.4, which isn't going to work anyway. That's where I'm coming from at the moment. And the fact that it means talking about habitats, I'm afraid if we're going to make decisions, we're going to have to do them properly and consider everything instead of just ignore the elephant in the room, Mr. Chairman. I really think that, as far as I'm concerned, this is a delegated decision. It's not our decision. This is a delegated decision, and it's the head of it's Elizabeth's call on this one, and she's asked for a steer on this, and I very strongly feel that we shouldn't be going this direction. We should be looking at trying to help Cranley out, because they don't have any of the SBA protection, and we really should be starting to look after Cranley, Dunsfold and that area, because the law will look after the rest as long as we respect it. So
thank you.
That's where I think we should be steering towards with this, looking after Littlemead. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Forresky.
Thank you, Chairman. Good report, and I kind of get where Councillor Mullen is coming from, and I have some empathy with what Councillor Hyman's just said there, because I think if we're going to steer this in the direction we want it to be, and I do think it is the right way to go, and the evidence gathering needs to be sound evidence, and it needs to be accurate if it's going to be helpful. And I would point that to one particular item in here with regards to Hewitt's Industrial Estate. I mean, Hewitt's Industrial Estate, when you've been around as long as I have, you know the history of this place, so you can't base any steer on that particular one because that was a rundown site for decades where they were paying peppercorn rates because the facilities themselves didn't marry up to modern day facilities. No, it was underutilised for a long time and we lost valuable green sites when this was used as evidence that it was an active employment site when in actual fact it wasn't. And it just worries me that at the time of that happening we saw many applications coming forward that included commercial and employment site but were told to go and wait, consider them because there was no evidence to suggest that they were needed. Manfield Industrial Park as well is included in this report for several months. I think it was about 9 months of the period of 2014 to 15 had 5,000 square feet available that wasn't occupied. So I think the great report, a long way to go. Pilot is necessary, but the evidence gathering has to be of a quality that it can be used and it has to be on data that is accurate. So a lot of what's there is retrospective, but in principle I support it, but it is a real need to get that evidence base is strong and sound so it can be effective when applied. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Moving to the recommendation then, members. The recommendation is the committee recommends to Council the 3 paragraphs there on pages 13 and 14 of our report. Have those in favour please show? Those against? Abstentions? 1 and 1. Thank you. Noted. Moving on to item 7, an application for planning permission A1, Amlets Lane, Cranley, GU 67DH, erection of 33 new dwellings, associated garage, including 5 additional affordable dwellings following the emission alterations of 22 dwellings on part of the previously consented site, giving a net gain of 11 dwellings. Chris French to introduce this.
Thank you, Chairman. There are 2 updates in the officer's report which are contained within the addendum. Firstly, there was a typographical error on page 46. The floor space of the house type 33 should read as 79 square metres rather than 69 square metres. Secondly, the infrastructure request from Surrey County Education Authority included an error in their calculation. They've confirmed that the infrastructure contribution should be 38,291, which is within the addendum. Those are all the updates, so now I'll run through the details of the application. This is the location plan for the site. The site itself has been outlined in red. It includes an internal spine road and parcels of land where the development is proposed to be altered. The blue line around the edge of the site denotes the wider development site. So the site, where the site as a whole has consent for 125 units at the moment. This is the layout plan as approved. You can see the central spine road and the units that are laid out within the consented scheme, and that's the 125 units. This plan shows the proposed site plan, but I've highlighted the areas in red where there are proposed to be alterations. As you can see, the changes primarily relate to the central parts of the site. The parcels of land to the north, east and west are a significant distance from the closest adjoining residential properties. And for ease of reference, I've labelled the areas 1 to 5. It'll help us as I go through the other slides. The south parcel of land, area 5, is the only area proposed to change where the units would have rear gardens backing onto rear gardens of existing properties. This is the proposed 10-year plan. The development, as approved, for 125 units, provided 40% on-site affordable housing. However, no affordable housing was proposed in the parts of the site that are subject to the current application. Therefore, the current application proposes an additional 5 units to keep the overall provision at 40%. The properties shown in yellow on this plan are the shared ownership units, and those shown in pink are the affordable rent properties. The next slides show a comparison between the consented scheme and the current proposal. On the right-hand side of the slide, you have the consented layout for area 1, with a run of 5 detached 5-bedroom properties along that section of the site. On the left, you have the proposed changes. 2 of the 5-bedroom properties remain, however, by providing a smaller detached unit in the centre of the site. There's space for 2 pairs of semi-detached dwellings, so on that parcel of land, 2 additional units would be provided. The pair of units at the top of the proposed of this area here, the pair of semi-detached units are plots 130 and 131, which are 2 3-bedroom units. I've provided the elevations for these, so you can see the proportions of that unit. As you can see, although the number of units would increase, there is still a good separation between those properties. This slide shows area 2. Whilst the majority of plots remain as detached units within area 2, they're predominantly 3-bedroom smaller units rather than being dominated by the larger 5-bedroom properties. This part of the site would also include some semi-detached units, similar to the one that I showed on the previous slide. I've also included one of the elevations of the detached units within that central area, which is area 2. This property would have a ridge height of approximately 9.1 metres and provides 3 double bedrooms. On the top left, we have area 3, with the proposed change providing 1 additional unit within that area. And on the top right, we have area 4. The only change to area 4 is actually the 2 detached units become a pair of semi-detached units, which would then form part of the affordable shared ownership provision. And these are the 2 semi-detached shared ownership units that I showed on that site plan. The building would remain of an appropriate design in keeping with the rest of the development. And this is area 5 to the south. 2 detached bungalows, which are here and here, would be replaced by a terrace of 3 properties, which would form part of the affordable provision. The rear gardens of these properties would back onto the properties in Hillard's View, so you can see the relationship on the bottom of this slide here. This slide also shows the relationship between the proposed units at area 5 and the properties within Hillard's View. The separation between the row of terraced properties and the closest garden of Hillard's View would be approximately 13 metres, with the separation of the rear of the neighbouring building, rear wall to rear wall, being approximately 25 metres. The level of separation is considered to be acceptable. These are the photographs from the site. Developments are already underway in relation to the 125 units, and there are spaces that have been left for the outcome of this proposal. So the 2, if you look at area B, the photograph B there, that's one of the 5-bedroom units. These 2 units are actually part of the original consent as well. So the space where the units to the north of that would go are on the other side of that that unit there. This is area 2. The photograph at the top is taken looking from the area where I'm marking here up into that parcel of land, and the photograph on the bottom is taken at the curve in the road down here, looking towards the bottom section of area 2. These are the site photographs of area 3. This is looking towards the boundary, which you can see is the other side of that treed area there. And area 4, where the two shared ownership units would be provided, is in this area here. And this is the site photograph for area 5, looking towards the Hilliers view. This slide splits the main considerations into matters of principal and technical opinion and matters of judgment. On the left-hand side, we have the matters of principal and technical opinion in terms of the principle of development. The principle of development has been established by the consent of the site for 125 units. With regards to SUDS and flood risk, the application has been supported by a drainage strategy which has been reviewed by the local lead flood authority. The local lead flood authority have confirmed that there would be sufficient capacity within the proposed drainage strategy. In terms of parking access and highway safety, the internal access road and the access onto Amlet's Lane would remain unaltered from the proposal. The County Highways Authority have reviewed the proposed proposal along with the concerns that have been raised about the capacity on the highway network, and have confirmed that they raise no objection on capacity grounds. The application has also been considered acceptable on ecology grounds, along with, subject to appropriate conditions. With regards to the matters of judgment, the impact of design and layout on visual amenity is considered to be acceptable. The site would retain a well laid out, spacious character, and the design of properties would be in keeping with those that have been consented. In terms of residential amenity, each of the proposed units would be afforded appropriate amenities to serve the future needs of the residents. Furthermore, the majority of the amendments are to plots away from the boundaries, and the application is considered to be acceptable with regards to the impact on residential amenity. In terms of housing mix, whilst it's noted that the development would deviate from the Chamar mix, the application takes the opportunity to replace a significant number of 5-bedroom properties with smaller 3-bedroom units. The application also allows for the provision of 5 additional affordable housing units. For the reasons set out in the officer's report, the application's recommendation A is for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Chris. Now we move to public speaking, and the supporter, Gary Worsfold.
Good evening, Chairman and members of the Development Control Committee. My name is Gary Worsfold of Scott Worsfold Architects. I was last before you in January and with Carla Holmes when, after revision and amendment, Allfold was presented before you. It was commended and described as outstanding. It was an example of a home builder working with your authority and collectively together refining a design for the betterment of all. You may recall that we achieved, I think, a unanimous approval. You may recall also that Amlet's Lane, Cranley, the application before you this evening, when it was originally approved, was described by you again as a near-perfect scheme when it received a commendation. In the spirit of this perfection, we are submitting before you, with a recommendation to approve, an alteration which requires your assessment and approval. We have developed an excellent working relationship, a common desire to create wonderful places and new homes. This evening's item before you is a simple adjust. Market demands simply are that in the approval granted, we have too many 5-bedroom dwellings. We have adjusted to lose some 5-bedroom homes and replace them with 3-bedroom, more affordable new homes. This all occurs within the inner environs of the design. It does not alter any design decision. It does not change any condition as our design touches or relates to neighbours. All is within the inner parts. No roads change. We simply wish to omit some more expensive homes and replace with more affordable, as that is what we understand Cranley needs. The result is an increase from 125 to 136, and of this, we will also see 5 more extra affordable homes within that now proposed. We have the same high quality architecture. This is a simple but fractional alteration. We have met with the parish council who have no objection. Indeed, they commended us. There is no objection from any statutory consultee. We respectfully ask that you concur with your officer's recommendation and resolve to grant consent. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. Before we move to the debate, the Development Control Manager has suggested that we might have 1 or 2 questions, not statements. If there are questions to put to the officers, could we have them now before we move into the debate? Councillor Gray.
Thank you. In terms of the presentation, I don't know whether I missed something, but you were referring to the bungalows being replaced. Does that mean those bungalows are being lost or they were just restructured? Could you clarify that for me? I think it was Area 2 or Area 3.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to clarify, so the red line that I've marked for Area 5 encompasses a plot where there would have been two bungalows previously. So those wouldn't be provided, and the scheme would provide for the detached unit and the 3 terrace properties, which are these here. Thank you.
Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chairman. I really haven't got a question for officers. I'm on to the statement stage, if that's okay with you, or I'm happy to defer to anybody else who wants to raise a question first.
I think there's a question from somebody on education, money and the change. Councillor Follows.
Sorry, yes, it was just if you could elaborate on what the error was, just so we're clear, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. They initially sent through a request, and the figures didn't add up in effect. So if you added the totals that they'd provided, they just simply didn't add up. So we've questioned that, and they provided us with new figures that do calculate correctly. So, thank you, Chairman.
Fine, thank you. I think we now move into.
Are we on questions, or are we just going?
Councillor Hyman, if you've got a question, yes, please.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd just like it confirming that I've got my head around what's going on here, because I find this one a little bit difficult to imagine. I don't know why. I can't picture it in my head. We're moving from 125 to 136 homes. There's an 11 extra, is how I understand it. And we're trying to get the balance down lower, because 4 or 5 bed homes in a big estate aren't probably going to sell as well as you might hope. So we're gaining 3 beds, losing 4 and 5 beds, and we're gaining a small gain in affordable. Now, it's the affordable direction that I'm heading. Well, I suppose what I'm asking is, do we have a viability study or something that justifies this? Because I think I read somewhere that there's a 70-30 split we should be having from a SHMAR a few years ago. I don't know where that is. It's in the paper somewhere, I'm sure. I don't think we've got any social rented in this. It's affordable rented is 50% and affordable part buy. Shared ownership is the other 50%. Do we have any viability statement that justifies why we're not trying to get more out of this, particularly if we're trying to make the scheme with smaller houses in it. I don't know how that affects the viability. Do we have a viability assessment or anything justifying what the split we've got at the moment? Because I think that's what residents would like to ask. Thanks.
And Chris?
Thank you, Chairman. Just to confirm, in terms of the percentage that they're providing of affordable overall, that doesn't conflict with our policy, and the mix within that has been looked at by the housing department, and they're not raising any objection to that to the split that's being proposed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So let's move on to the debate. I think Councillor Band, all yours.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I welcome this move to have more smaller houses and on this site, because I think it more closely matches the SMAR requirements. We're not quite there yet, but and we're still quite a long way short of what was originally proposed in the original outline permission, but it's an improvement of what was there before in percentage terms. My concern is the struggle how to get this application to this committee, because in calling it an application for moving to 33 houses from 22, I think it's a misnomer. It is, as Councillor Hyman said, really an application to move from 125 to 136. And that application was an application, or a series of applications approved by this committee. And this application originally started, it seemed to me anyway, because as something which might have been decided under delegated powers by officers under the Eastern Area scheme. Now, all the planning applications for this site have so far, up to this one, have been considered in terms of joint wards, both Cranley East and Cranley North, which is part of my ward. I knew nothing about this until Councillor Stennett alerted me to what was going on and sought to have it called in, and I supported that. It seems to me we need to be very careful, and our constitution procedures and our planning procedures need to make it very clear that any change in the number of housing on an application previously agreed by the Joint Planning Committee should automatically go back to the Joint Planning Committee for decision. Not an issue of delegated powers to officers, but should automatically go back to the Joint Planning Committee. And from my perspective, if that is not clear in the Constitution and the planning procedures, we as a Joint Planning Committee ought to be requesting the standards panel to be considering that and finding a way of ensuring that that is clear in the Constitution and planning procedures. I'm very concerned that this nearly slipped through the net. And I think it's important, as a committee, we take a stand that all applications affecting a modification to an application previously agreed by the Joint Planning Committee do go back to the Joint Planning Committee. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I'm sure the officers will agree that I also pressed that issue that it came to joint planning again. But I think Elizabeth Sims is fully aware of that. So, Councillor Denis.
Thank you, Chair. First, I think it's quite disappointing that the ward members, Councillor Forojewski and actually Councillor Townsend, were unable to attend because there was concerns about perception, whether there was a conflict. And I think that is a huge concern. You've got local residents who have elected two people who have been unable to speak. So I'm concerned not only about this application, but future ones. And I know my colleagues would agree about where we stand. So that's for another day, but I thought I would raise it because I know especially Councillor Townsend was extremely disappointed about not being able to speak. I looked at this application and I, like my colleagues, were disappointed that it actually is an additional 11. No matter how you dress it up, it is 11 additional houses. The Speaker mentioned Allfold, and one of the things that we fought very hard for were bungalows. And I have to admit, I'm extremely disappointed in Carla, having worked so hard with them for Allfold. And, you know, we said that was a good application. Then the next big, change to an application, they've gone against the one thing that we really spoke about, which was the need for bungalows where people wanted to downsize. So, again, personally, I'm really quite disappointed that they hadn't done that. What does concern me, and I suppose it's really a little bit about the what ifs for the future. We talk about Allfold. Well, already there's been amendments to the application that we said was really good, which didn't come to me and were approved. So we now could approve something else, and then you get amendments made. Yeah, maybe just changing in garages from parking spaces into garages, but amendments that change what we might have agreed or not. So I am a little bit disappointed about the bungalows. I am disappointed about the additional house numbers, and I'm disappointed that the two Democratic elected members were unable to speak about what the community think of this. And I think that's a really important factor that we're missing tonight. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Thank you. I do completely agree with both Councillors Band and Dina. So I was particularly concerned that the two elected members of that ward can't actually come and speak about this. I myself have a relatively large development coming up in my ward, and I would hate to think that there'd be anything that would prevent me from discussing that in this committee. And I'm sure everybody here thinks the same way, regardless of which party that they're from. I am pleased that this revised application has some more affordable homes and does slightly address the social mix. I think that's very good and something that we should be looking at further. But I would say that this almost incrementalist tactic of reviewing and upping the numbers in these planning applications, particularly when, as Councillor Dina says, we've come to a conclusion that something's been done very well, we've taken that as positive lessons learned, and then we've not done that on the next planning application, or we've sought to incrementally change it, often bypassing the institutions that we're actually sitting in. I agree, is disappointing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think most of the points I was going to raise have been raised by my colleagues, but I have to reinforce the issue on bungalows. We have a concern within Waverley. We've got a recognised ageing population. It's very difficult to persuade developers to put bungalows in. They go in, and now we're seeing them taken out, and I'm extremely disappointed with that. I'm also extremely disappointed because until it was clarified tonight, I found it very difficult to get my head around this one. And effectively what's been said is it's really is going back to the original application, and it's going up by 11 houses. The way that we're incrementally looking at the way those are being generated and where they're being substituted, but that's quite a complex thing to have here. And I'm not very happy. I'm not very happy with the bungalows. I'm not particularly happy the way it's presented. I would compliment them on the mix. I'm not a great believer in one-bedroomed houses. I'm not a great believer in five-bedroomed houses. So, I mean, despite the fact it doesn't totally line up with the SMAR, I actually think the mix is an improvement, but not as far as bungalows. And I wish we could start monitoring number of bungalows in there. It's a shame they're not in the SMAR.
Thank you. Councillor James. Did you call? Yeah.
Yes, I did. Thank you, Chairman. Having visited the site on the tour, I'm not surprised that they're not going to have as many five-bedroomed houses. I couldn't believe it, actually, cramming 5 bedrooms into that house. There's got a bungalow next door, and then the 5-bedroomed house. I don't expect they're finding the sale of that one. I think it's the interior decoration that's probably put people off. but it's all grey, silver and purple. I'm very happy with the smaller houses, and I like terraced houses. When you want to put a lot of houses together, terracing, the whole of London is terraced. Most town centres are terraced. People like little terraced houses. On that one there, I can see no reason why they can't leave the left-hand house as a bungalow and have 3 terraces. It doesn't have to be a 3-bedroom, 2-storey house. It could be a 1- or 2-bedroom bungalow. Perhaps they'll just note that one, and then we'd only lose 1 bungalow. But, you know, a terrace of bungalows is also very nice. In the middle of Petersfield, there's an estate, and it's got little terraced, literally 2-bedroom bungalows, and they're very small, and they're incredibly popular, and you can cram a lot in. But overall, I'm quite happy, and I will support the officers, because I do prefer the smaller houses. And if you want a 5-bedroom, probably £1 million house or £750,000 house, I wouldn't buy it on this site. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Munner.
Thank you, Chairman. One question that hasn't been asked, if it is indeed felt that there are too many 5-bedroom houses, and I can understand why. If you can't sell them, that's a great waste of buying power. But why not simply reduce the 5-bedroom houses you think you can't sell to 3-bedroom houses which you can? Why do the numbers have to go up?
Sorry, Councillor Nabil.
Thank you, Chairman. The only thing I have been working out for last 1 year, there always an application which comes in to extend more areas and more houses. Why can't it be stopped for once and for all that whatever we've given permission could not be changed on 120 houses, 125 houses, to be certain to make that decision for all, and it can't be changed again to 130 houses? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Coburn.
It's interesting hearing Councillor Nazir just talking about that, because when I was first on this council, and very green, as I still am probably, I actually said something similar to that at a meeting, and Michael Blower, an architect and one-time councillor here, said to me, the trouble is, until you actually start building, you don't always know what's going to work on a site. And I've always kept that in mind when I've been looking at sites. And I'm like everybody else. I'd like my ideal site with bigger gardens and, lots of space and trees, and certainly no leaps and laps, as you know. But, we're not in that world. We're in the world that we're living in. And I actually think this is going to be an improvement, although it is a rise in numbers, and I can understand people saying, why don't you just leave the numbers but improve what you've got? But we have to be realistic. I've got a question on bungalows. I mean, we're losing them right, left and centre in Farnham because people buy a bungalow, it's what they can just about afford, and then change it into a 5-bedroom house anyway. How much could we restrict it, even if we said to people, you've got to buy bungalows, build bungalows? But I have to say, I think the rationale for this actually works. The housing mix works. I like the style as far as I can see. And I think it's probably the right move on this site. Yes, it is 11 extra houses. And yes, I would prefer not to increase the number. But given the financial situation, the area we're living in, I think it's just inevitable that that's what will happen. And I think this is a better mix than the one that we gave permission for.
It's interesting, the parish council have given their support to the scheme as well, and particularly with the 5 additional affordable homes. Do the officers wish to add anything before we move to the recommendation? Nope. In that case, let's move to the recommendation. There are 2 of them. Recommendation A, that subject to completion of the 106 agreement within 6 months of the date of the committee resolution, to secure management and maintenance of place, space and suds provision, 40% affordable housing and financial contributions towards education, transport and environmental improvements, permission be granted. Those in favour, please show.
It's 10 in favour.
Those against?
None.
Abstentions? 3.
3.
3. Thank you very much. Permission is granted. We move to recommendation B, that if the requirements of recommendation A are not met, that permission be refused. Is that agreed? Thank you very much indeed. And that completes the meeting. Thank you all very much.